Hello. So as I was mentioning in some of my other videos that I was watching Ollie Matthews' channel for a while, and a lot of pretty much all of his stories in one way or another remind me of my upbringing or my mother, but there was this one girl, I think, who wrote in a couple of times, and one, she was just talking about her upbringing, and then one, he read a letter that her mother had written her, and I was thinking how scarily similar this woman sounded to my mother. I mean, not just like some of the other stories reminded me of her too, but this was like scary. Like I almost thought like she was like my sister I didn't know about. And then he went on to read her story and whatever, and said that that woman was actually in a cult, and this girl was raised in a cult, and I was. This I found out after I thought the upbringing was similar to mine. I wasn't raised in a cult, well, that I knew of. I guess in a way I was, because my mother was very similar to this woman. So it got me thinking, again, like how some of the stories and people of the lie were so similar to mine, and some of those stories were actually really disturbing. How fucked up my upbringing actually was, that my mother is so similar to a cult leader, or not, maybe not a leader, but like a prominent member of a cult, and how I identified with the girl that was raised as part of a cult. So, and I thought more about narcissism in general and their tactics, and especially when you grow up as a child. I guess this could happen in a relationship too, if someone starts a relationship with somebody and they're kind of insecure and dependent, and they're in a relationship with a narcissist that brainwashes them, and but as a child you're kind of like, it's not like the narcissist picks you because you're insecure or you're dependent. No, you're pretty much stuck because you're their child, and you're dependent on them, you're stuck living there, you're stuck in that environment. So, based on the way how I was treated as a child, I mean, I talked in one of my earlier videos how I was isolated, and how, my mom got a job in the school where I went to school and sort of alienated me from my classmates that way. And it's not like she was just a secretary or something that worked in the office and minded her own business. No, she was not only a teacher, but a reading specialist. So she taught students from every class, and she would actually walk around to people's classes and pull them out for their group meeting. So everybody knew who she was. She was in everybody's face, and I don't know if she worked at that, so she would be more prominent and everyone would know who she was. Because other people I knew, their mothers worked in the district too, but they were just like secretaries or librarians that just stayed and minded their own business. But no, not that would not have been good enough for my mother. She needed to be on me like every 5 minutes, so that was a good way to do it. And also how, I've said in that Munchausen's video how I was born prematurely, but then even after I got out of the hospital and gained weight and whatever, my mother never really forgot it, and she was kind of looking for conditions I would have resulting from it, or disabilities, or like looking for every little thing that could be wrong with me, kind of like, of course you ask her about it, she's like, oh, I just wanted you to have every advantage that... No, but it was just another way to isolate me from other children and control my education. And I think part of the reason she got the job in the school was because she wasn't going to be able to control me through some sort of disability and tailor my education or isolate me from other children that way. So then her only option was to get a job in the school. Looking back, I think that's really kind of what happened. But even though I was never diagnosed with anything, disabilities or illnesses or physical ailments, but she would tell me, like, if I came home from school, I had an insecure day, or like felt like I didn't do that well at something, she'd say, well, yeah, you know, I had you tested when you were this age because you were really bad at this, or you were really behind, or you were really bad at that, or you were never good at that, you know, like, meanwhile, they never found anything wrong, but she would always say, well, oh yeah, even when you were 5, you were bad at this, or I was worried because you were so behind, or I would, you know, so I think a normal parent, if that was their kid and they weren't diagnosed with anything, a normal parent would have forgotten it and moved on. But she had and this was like, some of this was even like when I was in middle school, so she'd bring up how like behind and developmentally delayed I was in nursery school. Even though, even obviously it wasn't even true because I wasn't diagnosed with anything. But she did it because she wanted me to be even more insecure and more isolated than I already was. So I just had no confidence and would never go out for a sport or any extracurricular activities because I had always felt like I had some sort of hidden disability. And yeah, and this bothered me for years. I think she wanted me to think this, but it bothered me for years. And I was convinced actually for years that I had some form of autism or Asperger's. And I think that's one way that cult leaders kind of groom their members or their victims, is one, they kind of isolate you from anybody that would threaten their cult, but also just break you down any way that they can so you feel that you're forever dependent on them, and that just take away any confidence in your ability to do things or your ability to relate to people so that you don't seek out people outside of that circle. Because people outside of the circle are a threat. And then, yeah, just like the isolation, the just total destruction from an early age of my confidence and my identity. And the not being allowed to be independent for 5 minutes, you know, the working in the school. And I told you, even because she got a job when I was still in primary school, like 2nd and 3rd grade, but she couldn't even, just being in the district wasn't even good enough for her. She had to manipulate her schedule so that whatever school I moved up to, her schedule would always change when I changed schools. It's not like I'd move up to one school and then the year later she would change, or the year before. No, it was always like, as I moved up to a new school, her schedule changed and she was in my new school. And actually I confronted her on this, like, I guess it was a couple of years ago. She's like, I was just so worried about you because your father was such a monster, and, you know, just total bullshit. Like I said in that video, the one place he would never show up, she's got to be, like, protecting me like a fucking bodyguard. Just doesn't make any sense. And she was in my teachers' faces all the time, tracking every test, quiz, homework assignment that I did, and getting ready to scold me if I was missing one assignment, or if I got a C+ on something. And, you know, like, I was not allowed to live and be a kid, you know, without getting, and every day, if it wasn't my grades, I was getting reprimanded because my room was messy, like, and then I confronted her recently about how she treated me as a child. Well, not recently, it was like years ago, but still, I was an adult. And she was like, well, I was so stressed with your father, and he did this, and he did that. I had more important things to worry about than your self-esteem. Kind of wording it like, how dare I call her out because she works so hard, and but it's even, I think it's even worse than, it's like I'm a demanding brat, like how dare I ask her to not abuse me, right? But, it's not even like she was preoccupied and didn't have time to worry about it. She deliberately destroyed my entire identity and my entire self-image. And the reason I think that is it was not, as she says, 4 or 5 isolated comments that I blow out of proportion and don't move on from. It was constant, day in and day out, subtle, kind of making me feel like I can't do anything right. And it wasn't all subtle. Some of it was like screaming at me for 10 minutes, like, so I'd be like shaking and then, you know, screaming at me for getting upset. Like I said in one of my videos how when I moved out and started living with my fiance, a lot of dreams and repressed memories came back, and I have like nightmares and flashbacks, like heart palpitations from how abused I was. And but yeah, those are all tactics, like how I was treated as a child is all similar to how cults operate. And also, as I mentioned a couple of videos ago, the gaslighting. And not just gaslighting, but like pre-gaslighting. How I was mentioning, sometimes it starts when you're a child, where they start pointing out inadequacies in other families. That might not even be true, by the way, but trying to make other parents and other families look bad so that you never question your abuse. Because you think, oh, well, maybe it isn't that bad because this person and that person, So it's like kind of taking away your voice at a young age, or making sure that you never have any faith in your own thoughts, your own perceptions, your own observations. I think that's a lot of the motivation, the driving force of how my mother treated me. She was just grooming me to be an abuse victim. Taking away any confidence I would have had, stopping any development in my own identity, and brainwashing me to the point where I lost complete faith in my own intuition and my own thoughts, and and there were times when I was thinking like, well, what is my problem and why am I still struggling? I don't have it that bad. I've actually thought that to myself, and now I look back and I think, well, yeah, it really was, and the whole brainwashing, that was all part of it. And I still get really angry sometimes when I think about it. And there are some other things I noticed too, how my entire extended family on my mother's side, like they'll sit around and they were talking about somebody, I don't know, someone's son had a drug problem, or I don't even know, and then they're saying, well, our family, we don't have that in our family. It's so great how even all the nieces and nephews all turned out so great, and we're so this and we're so that. Or they'll put down a different family, or a family of like a different ethnicity or something, like, oh, well, they're not like us, and we're so great, and we're this, and we're that. I mean, if you have to sit around as a family and say out loud how great you are, you're covering something up, I'm sorry. I mean, that, like, who does that? And I've always I started noticing at 10 or 11 years old, I mean, this might be because this is when my dad really started to go downhill, but I knew obviously my family wasn't normal with my father being the way he was, but that whole extended family, like, my mom was one of 5, and like they all had like these perfect cookie cutter families, like my cousin, like they were all popular in school, and like perfect cookie cutter families. Nobody was divorced, they all played sports, they were all popular, and I remember thinking to myself at a young age, like, this isn't real. I mean, you do have families like that here and there, but for an entire extended family to be so cookie cutter, it never really sat well with me. And I think I've always been like the scapegoat of the extended family. Part of it might be because of my dad, but part of it I think is just me as a person. Like they don't really, I just never really fit with them. But yeah, I just remember feeling like an outsider with the extended family, and just got this vibe from them, like, we're better than you. Like, we're better than you, and kind of like we're better than them, with them being anybody outside their clan. Just like just an air of superiority about them, which has always rubbed me the wrong way. And I started picking up on this at like 10 or 11 years old, and it's always bothered me. And another thing too is, I think I was talking to someone on my dad's side of the family about like the nature versus nurture debate in shaping the child's personality. And she was saying like, oh, I think it's more nature because how my father was also one of 5, and how they all, 5 of them grew up in the same house. And she was like, well, how different are all of us? Yeah, and I said, well, yeah, that's a really good point. And then I was having the same conversation with my mother, and I was like, yeah, well, how different are your siblings? You all have different personalities. This really, she did not like hearing this. She's like, well, not really. I mean, we're all the same, we're all family oriented, and we're all this and we're all that. And I'm like, well, Ma, those are just very broad generalizations. I mean, like, your brothers are obviously very different. She's like, well, no, they're both good fathers, and they're both family men, and they're both... I'm like, okay, well, I mean, look at all the cousins. I mean, we're all different, like, well, not really. I mean, you're all nice people that went to college. I mean, it's just variations on the same theme. Like, what even is that? That doesn't even make any sense. Nice people who went to college. You just described, like, half of America right there. Like, yeah, so... just variations on the same thing. And I found this disturbing because my mother's refusal to admit that people in her family have their own personalities. How she found that offensive that I would even say that her nieces and nephews or her siblings have their own personalities. How she found this terribly offensive, wouldn't admit to it. She's like, well, they're both family men and they're both the same. Like, why would you not want to see your family members as individuals? I mean, after researching, like the cult mentality of narcissistic families, and then how she reacted to that, to what I said, how you're so, just her outright refusal to acknowledge that her and her siblings and her nieces and nephews, refusal to acknowledge them as individuals, and like they're all the same and cookie cutter, like it's bad to not be that way. This I found really disturbing. And another thing too is, like I said, I always felt like an outsider. One thing I know and she's done this, is that if there's like either an argument or one of her siblings said something to me that was like offensive, or like they were looking for a fight, and then I said something later to my mother, like Uncle or Aunt so-and-so said this, she'd be like, my brother would never say that, or my sister would never, my siblings have better things to do than sit around and think about you and talk about you. Like, she still aligns herself more with her siblings, and I'm just an outsider. I mean, the woman is not well. And I said, one of my aunts made a comment that I was heavy and whatever, and I've never really been, I'm just not a stick. She's like, she said that once 2 years ago. Will you leave her alone? Like I'm a high school bully picking on her, like, 5-year-old sister or something. It's just like, she sees this solidarity or this unity still with her siblings, and like, I'm the imposter. She really is sick. But yeah, it's so funny how, they were talking about my weight, and then she's like, they have better things to do than sit around and think about you and talk about you. I mean, that was a while ago, but meanwhile, fast forward to now, she actually admits to me that she and her younger sister were talking about my cousin's weight behind her back. Like, oh, Kathy gained weight. And, I mean, she'd gained 5 pounds. She's not heavy either, but maybe she'd gained like 5 pounds, right? So apparently they do sit around and think about and talk about the nieces and nephews. Apparently they do. And then it's just even that much more idiotic because, oh, she gained weight. It was like 5 pounds maybe. And then like 2 weeks later, she comes out and announces that she's pregnant. I mean, fucking morons. That just like iced it right there. I'm like, wow, these people are a joke. I just can't do it anymore. So, maybe it's better that I'm the scapegoat. It's actually, being a black sheep might be a compliment. I mean, it usually is in narcissistic families, so I'm very happy to kind of have that honor. But yeah, those are kind of like thoughts for the day and how disturbing the whole thing is. And I'll see you on the next video.